Hello everyone, you're listening to Audio Bookish. This is a podcast about audiobooks. My name's Fahed Rahman. I'm joined by Poppy Knight.
Hello.
And the book that we're going to be doing today is Somebody Loves You by Mona Arshi. I'll read out the blurb for the book. Ruby is a girl who rarely speaks. Her mother is mentally ill, and her older sister, Rania, is eccentric and challenging to live with. In this hybrid novel, Arshi puts a new slant on the diasporic voice as a fictionalized memoir intertwines with poetry to explore the infinite, tiny wounds of family life, the damage we do to those we love most, and the power of love to heal that damage and help us forgive in the face of unspeakable grief and trauma that permeates our DNA. And Poppy will read out the author bio.
Yes, so Mona Arshi was born in West London, where she still lives. She worked as a human rights lawyer for Liberty for a decade before receiving a master's in creative writing from the University of East Anglia. Her debut poetry collection, Small Hands, was published in 2015, winning the Forward Prize Felix Dennis Prize for Best First Collection. Mona Arshi regularly appears on Radio 4 with commissions for Book of the Week and Front Row. Her poems have been published in The Sunday Times, The Guardian, and The Times of India, and most recently, The London Underground. Mona Arshi has recently been appointed Honorary Professor in both English and Law at the University of Liverpool.
Okay, so thank you to NetGalley for providing us with the advanced review copy of this. So I hadn't heard of this book before. We kind of got an email suggesting that these are the audiobooks that are kind of available for review copy, and is kind of one that you chose. So you have previously did your work experience with the company that published this. Is that correct?
Yes, so the publisher that publishes the print book is And Other Stories, and that's where I did some work experience while I was at uni in Sheffield. They're a Sheffield-based independent publisher, and they're fantastic. I really love them, and they've been so great for me. So I did some work experience and some freelance stuff with them. And so coincidentally, I'm pretty sure it was the exact same day that you forwarded me that email from NetGalley about This Is What There Is. When I saw that, I was sat in the train station because I was about to go to Sheffield for And Other Stories' 10th birthday celebration.
Okay.
The coincidence is ridiculous. So and I recognise the cover. They've kind of gone a new angle with covers for this new year of books, and they all look fantastic. And this one's really interesting with like bugs all over it and eyes done in a really nice kind of block pattern. So I'm not an art person. Kind of, illustrations that are sort of line and colour, and it's really, really cool. So I recognised it instantly and suggested that we could request that one because I knew of the print publisher. So and then that evening when I was at the 10th birthday celebrations, Mona, along with some other authors, was actually there giving a reading. So I heard a little clip from this one. I think it was the second section that she read out then. So that was my little taster before we got approved for the actual copy. So
it's a fascinating book in a lot of ways. So when I first started listening to it, so the chapters are quite short, and Mona reads, I believe Mona narrates the book herself.
She does, yes.
And when I first started listening to it, I thought, is this a novel or is it kind of like a book of poetry? Because it kind of like the first few chapters at least are kind of like quite short, and they do, when you're listening to them, they do sound very, very much like verse rather than prose. So I don't know, what were your kind of first impressions listening to those first few chapters?
I think pretty much agree with you. Yeah, definitely her poetry background certainly comes through. And it is quite a, non-standard form, I guess is one way of saying it, for writing a novel. This disjointed parts of a story in short sections, and that's one thing that And Other Stories really loves. They have on their website, and especially for submissions, that they're shamelessly literary, I think is the phrase. So that kind of experimental stuff is very much their kind of thing for acquiring. And I think I did find that kind of poetryness, that sort of idea of language is being used to create an atmosphere sort of thing, and it's quite abstract, is definitely your experience as you go through it, I think. But I think it's one of those things where once you get to the end of it, or when you get further into it, you see how it all comes together.
Yes, I think that's kind of the thing that I struggled with kind of initially. Is So I think the best way to describe it is like each chapter is kind of like a separate episode in her life. So it's not kind of like in other novels, kind of like this thing happened to X character, and then kind of the next chapter is kind of like dealing with the consequences of that. This is very much more kind of taking separate episodes in her life and describing what happened in that episode, and then we don't really see what the fallout of that particular that
Yeah.
particular section is going to be until kind of like there is a narrative strand running through the novel, and it is a novel, but it's you need to kind of like really pay attention. This isn't, usually when I'm listening to audiobooks, sometimes I like to have something else on, doing something, I'm doing something, so writing or tidying my room or whatever. This does require your full attention. I couldn't even listen to it on the underground. I had to kind of actually set aside some time and actually sit down and actually properly listen to it. So I don't know what you felt about the amount of concentration required to kind of fully appreciate what she was doing with the text.
Yeah, well, I mean, what a review that is, really, from Bed saying that this book made him stop and dedicate full time to it.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah.
No, I think that's a very fair thing to say. There is a lot going on, and it does ask for your attention. And I think not in a way where it's like, if you miss that person's name, that's it, you're ruined. It's not given enough detail. It's not guiding you through it. It's not that sort of thing. I think it is that thing of it's an experience. It's an experience listen. It's an experience read. You're being immersed in it, but from these disjointed, pinpointy ways. It really does, like you say, it begs your attention. It asks for you to be absorbed a little bit in the language, in the story, in the characters. Maybe a bit wishy-washy my description of that, but
I think that is fair, because more than maybe any other novel that I've listened to recently, kind of the most important things are kind of like the really small moments that she doesn't actually like punctuate that heavily. So I mean, let's start. You kind of mentioned characters in the last thing that you said there. So we've got, I think, essentially four main characters. We've got Ruby, we've got Rania, we've got their mother and their father, but I don't know where to kind of like begin with the characters. Ruby's our main protagonist, and in the blurb it does kind of mention it's semi-autobiographical. So I'm just wondering whether Ruby's based on Mona or her sister, or maybe it's an amalgam of different people in her family. I found her as a character really curious. Like, it's a character that you sympathize a lot with, but then she does do some things that are quite challenging and downright awful throughout the novel as well, and kind of just her mechanism of coping with what's happening within her family I felt was really interesting.
Yeah, so because it's spoken about a lot how she chooses not to talk, she prefers not to talk, and a lot of the book is focused on how everyone's trying to cure her of this, and different kind of professionals that she sees about it, her response to them, how different people in her life respond to it, how teachers respond, her sister, who, for the most part is really supportive and everything of it. And it's interesting you're saying about the kind of autobiographical stuff, because I wondered that as well. It's sort of, I was trying to work out where that settled with it, and I'm not fully sure either way anyway.
Yeah, I think I might have a slightly different experience listening to this than you did, because it really is kind of like a second generation story. I, myself, kind of, my mum and dad moved here kind of the 1970s, 1980s, and there's a lot about the way that their family interacts with their community that I really recognize, kind of like the aunties, this permeating like taboo about talking about mental illness, mental health as well. I think it's something I definitely recognize. And so I mean, just kind of like from that end, I really kind of, I can tell that she put a lot of her own experience into that. That's not something someone from outside, like the second generation culture, there's like lots of little details. You wouldn't be able to get that unless you'd kind of lived it. So that's another thing that I took from the book as well. I don't know if that kind of like, sometimes that can act as a barrier to some readers or listeners, kind of when there's so much of that kind of like experience into a novel. I was just wondering how you took that as well.
Yeah, certainly, no, definitely didn't see it as a barrier,
Yeah,
and it's just so good to hear experiences, isn't it? You know, we've
yeah,
spoken about this before, and obviously I cannot relate to it on a personal level of those things, but have been fortunate enough to, you know, hear similar things from like comedians that I follow and
yeah.
stuff like that. So yes, not aware in a personal sense, but I recognized a lot of what she was saying from what I've heard from comedians that have had similar experiences.
Yeah.
Probably more comedians than authors, I think, but definitely a lot of stand up that I've watched has touched on those sorts of things. And yes, certainly you'll have a different experience of that. And I think that's a good point that, yes, that's probably a lot of where the autobiographical stuff comes. And I suppose I was meaning I didn't know where the stuff about not speaking, how
Yes,
that relates
that's
to her life and her experience of that, I don't know.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's kind of like, so there's the the second generation stuff, but there is also that other stuff. Kind of like I'm also like
Mm,
curious about kind of like it seemed like a really deeply personal novel. So
mm.
I'm kind of assuming that some of the mental health stuff has affected her family at some point.
And probably also with the human rights stuff that she's done, I
Yeah.
guess,
Yes.
witnessing
Yeah.
other people experiencing stuff like that, I would
Yeah.
have thought is a big part.
Yeah. So you kind of touched on that comedy. It's a beautiful book in that it runs that full gamut of things from like poignant to tragic, to comedic, to
Mm.
like slice of life observation. It is for me. There's so many lines that were kind of like deeply, deeply funny. Kind of, I've noted one down. Kind of a lot of the text is concerned with the way that women are supposed to be perceived.
Mm.
I think that's kind of my interpretation, and kind of I think there was one section where she was talking to an auntie, overheard a conversation with an auntie, and the line that had me giggling
Mm.
like for a considerable amount of time was that her worry about being as unmarried as a coconut
Mm.
had me absolutely. I was just like, that is, and the way she delivered it was just like
Yeah.
it was just it was like perfect. So I was just wondering how you felt kind of it ran through those things of like being funny and being tragic and being poignant and being sad and then hopeful and all those sorts of things. Kind of what did you think the overall tone of the text was?
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I think it does mix about quite a bit. I'm not sure I had as many like laugh out loud moments, but
Yeah,
I did think, yeah, there was some wit to a lot of stuff. One thing I really liked was obviously poetry background. Imagery is
yeah,
going to be really good, and
yeah,
imagery like that simile there. And there was a metaphor of her dreams leaking out of her mouth, which I thought
yes,
when she was talking in her sleep, which I just thought was incredible. I really loved that one. And yeah, and I think it does, and it changes tone, and there are more kind of day-to-day things that are made light of, and then there are bigger things that are taken really seriously. And I found, I guess I referenced this when we were talking about character before, I found an exchange with Ruby and Rania when they were lay next to each other in the bed, and that sisterly moment of support for each other. And yeah, it was a really poignant moment, and I think that
yeah.
definitely shows through that that's written very well, and that yeah, you have peaks and troughs of different kinds of emotions, I think, throughout it.
Yeah, and it is kind of a coming of age story
Mm.
as well in a lot of ways. The other thing that really kind of struck a chord with me was Ruby's struggles with like seeking affection from boys,
Mm.
and the various suitors that she comes across and either rejects or chases after. That kind of like sense, like, and I think this is something that maybe is an underlying theme of the book, is kind of like wanting to be wanted by someone.
Mm.
And I think because of her mother being away so often, I think there is kind of her need to have affection. And I'm not saying that she doesn't receive affection from her sister and her father, but kind of that affection that you do get from your mother, I think is also kind of quite important. I think that is the other thing that kind of like came across to me in Ruby's character.
Yeah, and I think it's sort of as if the two sisters are, I guess, what could be considered polar opposites of having that need.
Yeah.
So, sort of Ruby retreating into herself, and Rania being more extroverted and going
Yes.
out and seeking affection, and the fact that their behaviors of kind of loud and quiet well behaved in air quotes and
Yes. Yeah.
not so much. And
Yeah.
it's sort of as if it's taken of, here's the two extreme ends of how people can be tempted to respond to that feeling of wanting love and acceptance.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a curious, it's not something that had occurred to me until you just said it now. Kind of
Okay.
like, they are kind of like polar opposites in terms of, you know, Ranya's kind of very much the more confident of the sisters. She's the one who's going out there, you know, wearing going out outfits kind of in a strange way. I hate using this word, but kind of like the more westernized of the two
Right.
sisters were kind of like Ruby's a little bit. They're kind of from an Asian culture. They're both acting in a way that's kind of like unacceptable, but unacceptable in kind of like different ways. It's kind of because, you know, what Ruby does is like remaining like quiet. It would, I don't want to say weird, but kind of it would be kind of like, oh, what's going on,
Yeah.
you know, with the girl over there. And yeah, it's interesting that you picked up on that.
Yeah, and I think it definitely is referenced in it, and probably, as you say, you'll pick more up from it than I will in sort of subtext, but a lot of it being about expectations for women and expectations from women in those families and stuff like that definitely seems to be a big part of it.
So we've talked about Rania a little bit as well. I found her relationship with her sister quite, I don't know what the word is. It was strained in parts, but you can definitely tell they had like a deep attachment to each other. I think it's kind of that sort of thing. You can only really be truly mean to the people that you love a lot. And, you know, Rania does kind of treats it like a piece of like, I don't know, furniture sometimes. And, you know, I'm just thinking about that section in the book where she drags her along to a party, and kind of like, that's what I just need you to come along so that dad will let me come out, that sort of thing. So then I was just wondering if you wanted to kind of like talk about Rania a little bit more, what you felt about their relationship.
Yeah, we can do. I think it definitely rang true to me as quite a sisterly relationship. I think you have that highs and lows of being the biggest advocate and also being not the best to them kind of thing. And but I thought ultimately it was that love that came through for me for sure with the two of them. But also interesting because Ruby has a sort of sisterly-ish relationship with another friend who has a younger sister, and they almost swap older and younger sisters, don't they? Kind of swap the pairs around, which is quite interesting witnessing that relationship as well, and the difference between them and the bits of jealousies as well when the different sisters are like, you know, why is my sister with that sister and all that sort of thing. It's interesting.
Oh, it's good that you mentioned kind of the other pair of sisters, because one of the other lines that really goes through the book is kind of how you try out different versions of yourself as you're growing up. And Ruby never actually really does that. She kind of like, I'm not saying she doesn't develop as a character, but you can kind of see that, you know, certainly, you know, when they go into kind of secondary school, I think there's a boy that she fancied that kind of like takes on a different persona. And then I think the younger sister and the other pair changes personality a lot. And I think Rania also changes personality kind of through the book as well, where Ruby kind of still uses the same tools to cope with her mum's mental illness as she's kind of been using since childhood. So that's kind of like, she doesn't attempt that. I mean, there's a specific bit in the book where her dad says like, look, secondary school, nobody knows you. You can be somebody else. And she doesn't really kind of like take that opportunity. So I was just wondering if that spoke to you in any way at all.
I'm not sure I'd thought of it specifically as kind of not changing, and also because I think, like you say, that response stays constant. She doesn't want to speak, but things like how she still responds and interacts with people. So she stood up to a teacher with a revised contract for the club thing or something like that.
I love that church thing.
And she sends, where in childhood a friend of hers told her that she wouldn't be friends with her anymore because of where her family was from. She then, as this previous friend gets older and is in a relationship with someone from the similar background, her response to that is not the response that the original girl who'd been rejected by a friend on racial grounds would have done. So I think that trying to avoid spoilers is quite an evidence of, okay, well, maybe on the outside you think she hasn't changed because this behaviour of not speaking is the same. I think still a lot of her personality does alter as she gets older, and she does reflect on things and soak things up and becomes, an older, more experienced person, and a person going through, teens, puberty, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. There is a lot of teen angst in this story. I think I agree with a lot of what you said. It's kind of like her transformation, a lot of it is kind of like internal. The only kind of real big external act that she takes on is at one point where she shaves her head. Apart from that, she doesn't really change her external self too much. I think that there's one particular incident that we're both desperately trying not to talk about that happens kind of later on in the book, and we will try to avoid spoilers too much in this, because if we give away too many of the incidents and the events that happen, it kind of, I think with this particular text, it will kind of change the experience that you have with it. So it's kind of like, we'll maybe talk. I do want to talk to you about it offline, but we'll talk about it kind of offline.
I think it's important as well, just on what you were saying about kind of of her not choosing to use her voice and stuff like that. And I think it doesn't have it's not a kind of book that has a moral to it in that sense.
No.
But I think it does, because you are hearing her thoughts and you are hearing how not good the process of other people trying to get her to talk is. I think it really does champion for that not insistence on a cure, air quotes again, and not insistence on everyone fitting what we think should be normal. And like I say, I don't think it gives a hardline moral to it, but I think it is stepping towards trying to have a bit more of an open mind and acceptance on that, I guess. And this is partly, I think, where I'm curious about the autobiographicalness, or what Mona's experiences are with that. Because obviously it's more important to hear from someone whose experience that is, to know how they feel about it and that sort of thing. And unfortunately we don't have much about, people who choose to be mute in books, TV, film, whatever, as we don't with a lot of other things. And that when we do, it tends to be written by those who do speak, and who are not, I guess, part of that community is sort of the way to phrase it. So I'm rambling a little bit, but I think sort of my point being, I think it does aim to raise this idea that we shouldn't be working towards an ideal where everyone is normal and everyone speaks and everyone gets cured of all these things and stuff like that. That I think that's definitely one of the many strands of this book, I think.
Yeah, I think kind of just building on what you're saying there, I think a lot of the treatment that she gets is kind of, what's the right way? This is kind of, it's a period novel in a lot of ways, because the sense that I've got this, it's not set in the modern day. I think it's because there's no reference to mobile phones and things like that. I think it's very much that, for me, it felt like it was set in the 80s or the 90s, and I think a lot of the attitudes of the characters and the people throughout the book are affected by that, especially kind of around mental health, kind of the treatment that both Ruby and her mother receives. And just speaking about Ruby's mother, like the mental health condition that maybe someone who's got a bit better knowledge of different mental health conditions would be able to kind of identify what afflicted Ruby's mother, but she never specifically says, oh, she's affected by such and such condition. So there's also that thing, is kind of like, oh, does Ruby actually know what is happening to her mother and kind of why, or is that just being hidden away from her as it's been kind of hidden away from the reader listener?
I think that's probably a very good point. I think because it is written from Ruby's perspective, you are getting what Ruby gets. You get that, she knows her mum's not here at times. She goes and visits her where she is, and she knows that she is there, and she knows how she responds there. She knows that there's at one point where the staff there don't want her to go in and see her and stuff. She knows kind of exchanges that happen in the garden with a neighbour, but she doesn't know everything. And I think, yeah, that's a very good point. I think it's possibly partly one of those things of, when we're talking about how it affects children, those things about what do children know, how is it communicated to children, and especially if other people in the family don't want to acknowledge it to even adults in the family, then acknowledging it to kids adds another level on that they're going to not want to do.
Yeah, so we haven't talked really much about Mona's narration. I thought she did a fantastic job of reading this. There was, what's the phrase I'm looking? There was kind of a light touch to the way that she narrated it, and I don't know, there's kind of like, not humorful, but there's kind of a witty, you can kind of like, there's an intelligent aspect to the way that she kind of narrates. You can kind of like tell that she's really intelligent in the way that she narrates the book, and there's kind of like this lightness of touch to the way that she narrates as well that I found really engaging.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think she's got a real command of the language that she's written, and that probably a lot of that comes with her poetry background, and she'll have really thought about each word and how it should sound and that sort of thing. I think I also thought there was one particular voice that really stood out to me, because there was one older character and the old lady voice was just incredible. I thought that kind of crackle that you have on, I'm thinking mainly actually TV stuff and stuff like that, of, you ask someone, what does an old person sound like, and the impression that they do, but it was just, it really stood out to me as being really good. And yeah, I thought she did fab. I thought the pacing was really good and engaging to listen to, definitely.
Yeah, and I think, I don't know what her performance of the book was like at the reading that she did at the 10-year anniversary, but she narrates with a beautiful rhythm, and I think part of that is down to the text, and I think part of that is probably down to the fact that she's a poet that's used to reading her work out in public as well. So I think that aspect of it definitely lent something to the production as well.
Yeah, agreed.
Okay, so is there anything else on your notes that you kind of want to talk about, or we touched on everything?
Well, sort of kind of, I guess, in a summary sense of things, I had a couple of things to bring up. Kind of going back to the metaphors and stuff, because I kind of wanted to really stress this point that if you're the kind of person that does really like a good metaphor, I think even if you're not interested in anything else about it, this has been a really good book to listen to. And especially so I did a lot of studying sort of theories on metaphor at uni, and sort of how the human brain thinks of metaphor, and also how the human brain just works in terms of metaphor, like sees everything in terms of metaphor. Really interesting. Really loved it, and sort of pulls on artificial intelligence stuff, because a lot of this was brought about because they were trying to replicate human brains in computers, and realised actually quite how much stuff goes on, and how much we map our knowledge that we have of one topic onto another, and how that is a metaphor in itself, and just that's how we function. I will stop nerding out about that now. But my point being, I think, if I were doing that module again, then this text, incredible mine of resources for different metaphors and how they can pull on different things and, produce such an amazing atmosphere. So I'd definitely say that. And then on a rather flipped note, but you can definitely be a person that agrees with both, there was quite a lot of specific, like, technical gardening stuff in there. I sort of indicated how there was kind of bugs on the cover and plants on the cover, and there was discussions with a neighbour, and these were about gardening. And I do think as well, because it does actually form quite a big part of the book, and because it is done quite technical, I think if you yourself or people in your life are into gardening, I think this is an angle that would really make you keen on listening to this book as well, and then hopefully you'd enjoy the other aspects of it too, I thought.
Yeah, I think so. All right, so just again speaking from a personal perspective, like gardening is something that a lot of women from the Southeast Asian culture love doing. It's kind of like really, the way that they keep fit is kind of like a point of pride for them, kind of like when other aunties and relatives come over, so to see this plant that I've grown, see this fruit that I've grown and stuff like that. So I think the gardening metaphor stuff, kind of, that mad dash to try and like plant things at midnight, or trying to control. There's a really beautiful section where they've got a neighbor next door that kind of gives her a lot of advice about how to do the gardening stuff, and this thing about trying to keep nature and wildlife at bay. And so there's a lot of like technical gardening talk that kind of, if you know about gardening, you might be able to take a deeper level of meaning from it than probably even myself or Poppy did. But definitely the gardening thing is a big thing in kind of like Southeast Asian culture. So that is actually one of the notes that I've got up on my list as well. So yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, that's really interesting to know how those two parts of it intersect. I didn't know that otherwise.
Yeah. So the audiobook's quite short. I can't remember how long it is. I
believe it's about 5 hours.
5 hours. So it's, even if you're, a 2x speed listener, just slow it down. It's only 5 hours. Just take your time. Listen to it.
4 hours.
4 hours. Come on, just take your time and listen to it. You can kind of do that over a couple of evenings. I think I really enjoyed it. It's something, out of all the books that I've listened to this year, it's one of them that's actually probably lingered with me the most afterwards. So I'm still kind of thinking about different things that happened to the characters. Not so much the verse or the metaphors of that, I think, really struck a home with you, but just kind of the way that Mona describes like different experiences really struck a chord with me. I think especially, my mother died last year now, kind of the 1 year anniversary was last month. And that stuff about Ruby kind of like needing her mum and stuff like that really touched my heart as well. So it's a beautifully written book. I'm curious to see what the written form of the book, like, what the published book actually looks like, to see if like it does look like verse or if it's written as a novel. So I'm probably going to buy a hard copy of this just to see.
Under the stories will be pleased.
To see if there's a difference yet. So this is highly recommended from me. Please go out and buy a copy of the audiobook, or buy a book from your local bookshop as well. So I don't know how you feel about it, Poppy.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm really pleased that you liked it so much. Definitely really pleased about that. And I did as well. I thought it was good. Like you alluded to earlier, I wasn't 1,000% convinced at the start. Not that I disliked it, but I wasn't into it yet, because it is the kind of thing that you need to get into. You need to soak it up, and you don't realise that you've got such a clear picture of the characters in the world until, near the end. And then you're like, I feel like I've known them all my life sort of situation. It's a really kind of window into a world rather than the classic like story narrative. And that has really stuck with me, because it does leave you lingering, because you suddenly realise you've been pulled so close into something that you didn't realise you had. And I think that's a really powerful effect that it has to leave over you, for sure.
Yeah. I mean, it's almost like Insidious, the way it kind of like it gets its claws in.
Oh, you didn't tell me we were getting that close.
Kind of like, so it's highly recommended from me. And so this is the last episode of this season, guys. We're going to be taking a bit of a break over, I think, December. I've started a new job. Poppy's quite busy with her work, so we just need a little bit of time to decompress, think about what we're going to be doing for next season. We will be back in the new year with more guests, more reviews and stuff like that. So I was just wanting to thank everyone who's listened. It's been really great to interact with people over like social media and get authors in touch who want us to review their books. Yes, I just really deeply thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. It's the same. Thank you so much for listening, and people that have reviewed and who've got in touch with us and stuff. It's really good. Even just a line that says, I really enjoyed listening, just honestly makes our day. Really, really does. So and hearing recommendations, hearing your thoughts on the books and stuff like that. If there's anything that you want us to review in season 3, let us know. I'm sure we can give that a go. So thank you so much for listening. I'm having so much fun doing this podcast, and thank you.
So I mean, I don't know if you saw the announcement earlier on this week, but kind of like Terry Pratchett's going to be getting new.
Yes, I did. I was going to talk to you about that.
So we're going to try and get our hands on that
definitely
at some point. Okay, guys, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And we'll see you in the new year.
Yeah, have a lovely holidays. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.